Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Other Record Labels. I'm your host, Scott Orr, where we talk about the art and culture of running an independent record label. Today is a very exciting episode because we're tackling a huge subject, a subject that I get emailed a lot. In fact, people once a week at least will email me and confide in me that they want to start a record label. They have everything they need to start a record label, but why would an artist sign with them if they're a brand new label, if they don't have any accolades or they don't have a track record of success like other labels? And so today we're going to talk about this subject. In fact, it's such a big subject that I'm breaking it down into 2 episodes. Today, we're going to talk about why artists need a record label. And in 2 weeks from now, if you're listening to this into the future, then it should be ready as now. But after our next interview episode, we're going to do another episode on this topic, and we're going to talk about how to boost your confidence. But today, we're going to focus on why artists need a record label. Now, before you get after me in the comments, you can swap out the word need, because I know in today's day and age, artists don't need record labels. And this is one of the things that we as indie record labels, as small record labels, excuse me, are struggling with, because independent artists can self-release on their own. In fact, they can record and mix and master and distribute on their own. And there's very few gatekeepers, which is great. We love that. But we're going to talk about why an artist will benefit from working with a record label. And this is something that you can communicate to the artists that you want to work with. And so we're going to walk through this massive subject. I know it's been on the minds of a lot of our listeners, and this applies to people at any stage. I mean, even if you are at a stage, you've been around for 5 years or you've been around for 5 minutes, I think this is really relevant. I want to make sure that this, well, it's a great question. How do I get artists to sign to my label? I want to make sure that it's coming from a place of humility. And I want to make sure that it's not coming from a place of fear or that it's coming from the imposter syndrome. I've talked to record labels of all sizes, up to 25 years old, who have told me that they still struggle with the imposter syndrome. None of us are born as lawyers or doctors or record label owners. This is all something that we grow into, we evolve, and we learn and gain experience. And so I think for all of us, I just want to make sure that as we tackle this subject of why artists should sign to a record label, that we understand that our hesitations are coming from humility and wanting to do right by the artist, and not coming from a place of fear and using it as a crutch or an excuse to finally start a record label or to work with an artist. Okay, you ready? Let's dive in. So this is going to be a 2-part series. Before I do, by the way, if you are in the early stages of starting a record label, I put together this super helpful toolkit. It's called the Record Label Toolkit. It's a free download. You can get it by going to otherrecordlabels.com/toolkit. Inside, I have put a checklist on how to start a record label, a marketing checklist for when it's time to promote a record. We have some social media templates that you can use in there. There's a recording contract that we had a lawyer put together for us that you can use. There is a bio writing template and some advice on how to write bios. So all of our helpful resources are crammed into this toolkit that you can get for free by going to otherrecordlabels.com/toolkit and preparing yourself by listening to amazing podcasts about record labels and reading books by the authors, hosts of amazing record label podcasts will help you overcome some of the imposter syndrome. But let's talk about today why artists should sign to a record label. Number one, and I love this one, number one is it doubles the efforts. And this has nothing to do with how good you are as a record label owner or as a promoter of new music or whatever. It's just math, is that with the artist working to promote their release and now their label coming alongside to work on the release, it literally doubles the effort. And so it doesn't matter if both are bad at their job, at least they're twice as bad. You understand? And so this is what I love. And I first learned of this when I hired a publicist. And I was unsure about spending the money to hire a publicist. And I think at the time it was just for one song, but it was a significant amount of money at the time. And we hired a publicist. And the amazing thing, the very first thing that came from it, regardless of what kind of press coverage they got, the very first thing I noticed that came from it was the fact that it freed me up, because normally I was pitching to blogs and to curators, and now the publicist was doing that. So as a record label owner, I was now freed up to pursue something else. I could maybe put a little more effort into, into streaming, Or I could focus on some in-person events. And we ended up mailing postcards for that album. And so I was able to do some things that I wouldn't have been able to do if I was handling just the general pitching to music writers and to curators. And I think the same thing happens when an artist comes alongside and works with a record label. Is now the record label is taking care of the pitching, or maybe the record label is taking care of the manufacturing, which would have normally slowed down the artist or intimidated the artist. And now the artist has time to be more creative and, let's say, work on their tour or to book a tour, or maybe the artist now has free time to go back into the studio and record some B-sides or record some alternative versions of the song that you can use to promote the album. And so this idea is, again, it's simple. It's 1 + 1 = 2. And so this is something that you can talk to an artist about if you're trying to convince them to come on board with the label, is saying, listen, I at the least can take off some of the responsibilities from you, free you up so that you can do more things. And now there's 2 people. I mean, if your record label is a 1-person operation, and I know a lot of that's my label. I know a lot of labels in our audience are 1-person operations. This is now you and the artist coming together. And I think it's a great way to manage expectations. You could say to the artist, listen, I can't promise you a playlist, an editorial playlist. I can't promise you coverage in a great music magazine. I can't promise you a sync licensing deal. I can't promise you that we'll be able to afford vinyl, but I can promise that I will work on all of these things, freeing you up to do something else. So that's number 1, is that it doubles the efforts. Number 2 is that it provides community. And this is very important, is that if you are a record label that has other artists on your label, or you have other people involved with helping you run the label, all of a sudden this artist who has been self-releasing music in a vacuum, alienated, isolated on their own, now has some friends, has some fans who are coming alongside and helping them release this music. And that goes a long way. I've heard about record labels of label mates who have recorded or helped mix their other artists on the label. I've heard of record labels who different artists on the roster will help promote the album, somebody else's album, when it comes out, because it's on the same label as them, and they feel some sort of family connection because they're all together. In fact, a couple of months ago, I was doing a coaching call with an independent artist who wanted to get my opinion on how to pitch his album to independent record labels. And I asked him, what is it that you want out of a record deal? Like, what are some of the things that you think a record label will provide? And the number one thing he said was community. And I found that to be surprising, but it's something that you can offer your artists who you want to sign to your label. And it's a free thing. Community is a free thing. And maybe, like we talked about in the previous example, maybe for now, the community is just you and the artist. And that's okay. Maybe it's you and the band. Maybe it's you and the person who works at your label and the band. That's a community, and it's small. That's okay. I think it's really important that you utilize your community as a record label, especially if you have more artists on your roster. You got to foster that roster. You know what I mean? Foster that roster. That's going on a t-shirt. It's okay to make a community out of what you got as well. And like I said, if it's just you, you can make a community out of that. If it's just 1 or 2 other artists, but it's very important that you foster that community because communities also attract crowds. As this community grows around your record label, then audiences locally and on social media start to notice that there are these artists who are all talking about this record label. There are artists who are all talking about each other, and that starts to generate a little bit of interest. So number 2 is community. Number 3, and this one is a little bit of a little intangible, but it I think is really true. And I've heard about this a lot from the labels that we talk to. But number 3 is that we get perceived legitimacy. And whether or not I say perceived, because I don't know if signing a record deal makes you legitimate as an independent artist. But for a lot of independent artists, there is this perception that when we sign a record deal, that it does give a little bit of legitimacy. Why? Because independent artists are always the one who are tooting their own horn. They're the ones who are saying, come listen to my music. When you have one more person, literally just one extra person who says, listen to this band, all of a sudden in the eyes of their friends and family and their small fan group, they start to notice and think, wow, this stranger who's not their mom is promoting their music, there must be something to this band. And I know that this is a little bit shallow, but it's something that's actually really important to the artist. In fact, when I was talking to that artist, one of the things was community and then legitimacy. He just thought there's just some sort of affirmation that comes with getting signed to a record label. In fact, if you've listened to our podcast and you've listened to my interviews with some of the record labels, you know that there are dozens of record labels I've interviewed over the years, mine included, that got started as a fake label, a logo put on the back of my own CDs or put on the back of other bands who've started a record label. They put this, even I'm talking about record labels have been around for 35 years, have sold millions and millions of records, have told me that it started off by just a fake logo on the back of a 7-inch or the back of a CD to appear legitimate. And I think that's really funny how it starts off that way and then it ends up blossoming into something bigger. And so it's actually how a lot of us got started. But I want to talk about the bigger picture about why perceived legitimacy is important, is because it actually represents something bigger. It represents accountability. It represents community, like we talked about before. And it represents affirmation. These are all things that are really important to an artist. And I think they're really important for record labels to provide an artist. So not only are we slapping this logo on the side of their vinyl or in the copyright tag on Spotify or adding it to our Bandcamp roster, but we're actually affirming and validating their creativity and their artwork. And we're saying, we love this. We're excited about it. We want people to hear it. And it's providing the artist with community, even if it's just one extra person. And it provides the artist with accountability and saying, we want more music out of you. We want you to keep doing what you're doing. And so these are three ways or three reasons why I think artists should sign with a record label and why artists should work with a record label. On the next episode, we're going to talk about, in 2 weeks from now, we're going to talk about how to boost your confidence. We're going to keep talking about this subject of how to get artists to sign to your label, how to validate yourself, and how to feel confident in working with an artist that you really admire, or just feeling like they should give you the rights to their music and to partner with you. So to go back over what we talked about is that an artist working with a record label, it doubles the efforts, number one. Number two is it provides community. And number three is it provides perceived legitimacy, which seems shallow on the surface, but actually has more meaning. I hope that you found this helpful. All of our resources are really geared around not just the systems, although I love building the systems and the science behind running a record label, but also some of the things that dig deeper, a little bit more philosophical. And you can find all of these resources by going to otherrecordlabels.com, including our free toolkit, which you should grab. If you haven't already, grab. There's a link in all of these descriptions, otherrecordlabels.com/toolkit. Thank you for being a subscriber.